Before we talk about algorithms, code, or cryptography, we need to start with a much older question, a human question. A question that has followed us from tribes and villages all the way to global financial systems. Who decides what is true? In the traditional world of money, the answer has always been clear. Banks decide, governments decide, central authorities decide. If there is a dispute, someone at the top has the final word. If a mistake is made, someone has the power to reverse it. Trust in this world flows upward. We trust institutions because they have names, buildings, laws, and enforcement behind them. Bitcoin begins by rejecting that entire structure. Bitcoin proposes something radical, a financial system with no central authority, no administrator, no single point of control, no one to call, no one to complain to, no one to override the rules. And the moment you hear that, the most obvious question appears. If no one is in charge, how does anything get decided? Imagine thousands of computers scattered across the planet. They belong to strangers. They don't know each other. They don't trust each other. Some of them may even be actively hostile. Now imagine all of them maintaining the same ledger, the same history of transactions, and agreeing on which transactions are valid and which are not. That is not just a technical problem. That is a social problem, a philosophical problem. And in computer science, it has a name, the consensus problem. Consensus means agreement, but not casual agreement, not most people think this is okay. Consensus, in distributed systems, means every honest participant independently reaches the same conclusion, even in the presence of liars, failures, and delays. This problem is famously hard. In fact, for decades, it was considered unsolved in open systems. How do you coordinate agreement among participants when you cannot assume trust, identity, or good intentions? To understand why this matters, consider a simple scenario. Alice sends Bob 1 Bitcoin. Somewhere else, Alice also tries to send the same Bitcoin to Charlie. In a centralized system, a bank checks the account, approves one transaction, rejects the other, and updates its database. Easy. In Bitcoin, there is no central database. There is no master copy. Every participant keeps their own version of the ledger. So which transaction is real? Which one came first? Who gets to decide? If different parts of the network disagree, the system collapses. Money that can't agree on its own history is not money at all. This is why consensus is not a side feature of Bitcoin. It is the foundation. Everything else depends on it. But here is the deeper insight. Bitcoin does not ask participants to trust each other. It does not ask them to behave honestly out of goodwill. Instead, it asks a different question entirely. What if agreement could emerge from rules so strict, so costly to violate, that honesty becomes the most rational strategy? That is the shift. Bitcoin replaces trust in people with trust in a process. Instead of saying, believe me, the system says, verify this yourself. Instead of reputation, it uses proof. Instead of authority, it uses consequences. Every node in the network independently checks every rule, every transaction, every block. No one needs permission to participate, and no one needs permission to verify. But verification alone is not enough. The network still needs a way to decide which version of history is the real one when conflicts arise. Because in a global network, messages arrive at different times. Temporary disagreements are inevitable. So Bitcoin needs a mechanism that allows the network to converge on a single shared history again and again, block after block, year after year. This is where the idea of consensus becomes something more than agreement. It becomes a process of selection. Out of many possible versions of the ledger, the network must choose one. And that choice must be objective. It must be resistant to manipulation. And it must work even if some participants are trying to cheat. Traditional systems solve this by appointing a leader. Bitcoin refuses to do that. Instead, Bitcoin introduces competition. It turns consensus into a kind of race. Not a race of speed and communication, but a race of effort. A race where anyone can participate, but winning requires real work. Measurable work, costly work. At this point, we still haven't named the algorithm, and that's intentional. Because before you understand what Bitcoin uses, you need to understand why it had to be this way. Why something entirely new was required. Why older models of consensus, designed for closed corporate networks or trusted participants, simply would not survive in an open, permissionless world. Bitcoin was not designed to be efficient in the traditional sense. It was designed to be resilient, to survive attacks, to function without asking anyone for approval, to coordinate agreement among strangers who may never meet, never trust each other, and never stop trying to gain an advantage. And somehow, against all expectations, it works. For more than a decade, Bitcoin has continued to produce blocks, to agree on transaction history, to resist manipulation. Not because people are good, but because the rules are unforgiving. So the real question is no longer whether Bitcoin has a consensus algorithm. The real question is what kind of consensus can exist when trust is removed entirely? And to answer that, we now need to look at the mechanism Bitcoin chose, the mechanism that turns energy into truth, effort into agreement, and competition into order. In the next part, we finally give it a name. The mechanism Bitcoin uses to reach consensus has a name, but the name itself can be misleading if taken too literally. It is called proof of work. At first glance, it sounds technical, almost cold, but beneath the mathematics is a very human idea. If you want the right to influence the shared history of the system, you must first prove that you have paid a real price. In Bitcoin, no one gets to speak just because they want to. No one gets a louder voice because they are famous, wealthy, or well-connected. Influence is not granted by identity. It is earned through effort. Proof of work transforms consensus into a process where participation is open, but impact is costly. To understand how this works, imagine a giant puzzle that constantly resets itself. Anyone in the world is allowed to try solving it. There is no registration, no permission, no central coordinator, but the puzzle is intentionally difficult. Solving it requires computation, electricity, time, and specialized hardware. This is what Bitcoin mining really is. Miners gather recent transactions from the network and bundle them into a candidate block. They then attempt to solve a cryptographic puzzle by repeatedly hashing the block's data with different values, searching for a result that meets a very specific condition. The condition is arbitrary, but unforgiving. The output must be below a certain threshold. There is no shortcut. There is no clever trick. The only way to find a valid solution is to try and try and try again. Most attempts fail, a staggering number of them. But occasionally, someone finds a valid solution. When that happens, they broadcast the block to the network. Other nodes verify it independently. If everything checks out, the block is accepted, and the shared ledger advances by one step. That step matters, because whoever found the solution gets to propose the next chapter of Bitcoin's history. This is the core of proof of work. It is not about solving useful problems. It is about proving that a certain amount of irreversible effort has been expended, effort that cannot be faked, effort that cannot be copied, effort that exists in the physical world as consumed energy. Why does this matter? Because it changes the economics of dishonesty. In many systems, lying is cheap. You can create fake identities. You can flood the network with messages. You can pretend to be many participants at once. These are known as Sybil attacks, and they destroy systems that rely on counting votes or trusting identities. Proof of work ignores identity entirely. It does not care how many names you have. It only cares how much work you can perform. If you want to influence the system more, you must burn more energy. And energy is scarce. It has a real cost. It anchors the digital system to physical reality. This is why proof of work scales naturally with security. As Bitcoin becomes more valuable, more miners are willing to invest in hardware and electricity. The total amount of work securing the network increases. Attacking the system becomes proportionally more expensive. Mining is often misunderstood as a wasteful competition, but in reality, it is a defense mechanism. It is the wall that separates honest participants from attackers. And it is intentionally inefficient. Efficiency, in this context, would be dangerous. If producing blocks were cheap, then rewriting history would also be cheap. Proof of work makes history heavy. Every block is weighed down by the energy required to create it. This also explains why Bitcoin does not instantly finalize transactions. Blocks come roughly every 10 minutes. Confirmations stack slowly. Time itself becomes part of the security model. The deeper a transaction is buried under layers of work, the harder it becomes to reverse. Of course, this design choice comes with trade-offs. Proof of work consumes a vast amount of energy. Critics see this as a flaw or even a moral failure. They ask why a financial system should require so much electricity just to function. But this criticism often misses the point. Bitcoin is not trying to be cheap to run. It is trying to be impossible to control. Energy is not a bug. It is the cost of independence. It is what prevents anyone, anywhere, from rewriting the rules to suit themselves. It is what allows the system to remain neutral, even when powerful actors would prefer otherwise. Proof of work does not reward intelligence or virtue. It rewards commitment. It rewards those willing to invest in the system and play by its rules. And most importantly, it aligns incentives. Miners are not trusted because they are good. They are trusted because cheating would destroy the very value they are trying to earn. This is not trust in people. It is trust in economics. By turning consensus into a competitive process rooted in physical reality, Bitcoin found a way to coordinate agreement among strangers without asking them to trust each other at all. But there is still a deeper question waiting beneath the surface. Why does this actually work over time? Why doesn't the system collapse under its own incentives? And how does proof of work create stability in a world where everyone is self-interested? To answer that, we need to look beyond mechanics and into incentives, game theory, and the subtle way Bitcoin transforms self-interest into cooperation. That is where the real power of proof of work reveals itself. At this point, the mechanics of proof of work are clear. Miners compete, energy is consumed, blocks are produced, the ledger moves forward. But mechanics alone do not explain why the system remains stable year after year. The deeper question is not how proof of work functions, but why it continues to function in a world full of self-interest. Bitcoin assumes nothing about human goodness. It does not rely on honesty as a moral choice. Instead, it treats honesty as an economic outcome. This is the quiet brilliance of the design. Every participant in the network is free to act selfishly. In fact, the system expects them to. But it structures the rules in such a way that selfish behavior, when followed consistently, leads to cooperation. This is where game theory enters the picture. For a miner, there are only a few meaningful options. They can follow the rules, extend the longest valid chain, and earn rewards. Or they can attempt to cheat by creating an alternative history, withholding blocks, or trying to reverse transactions. On paper, an attack might sound tempting. If someone could rewrite the ledger, they could steal funds or double-spend coins. But proof of work turns this into a brutally expensive gamble. To change history, an attacker would need to redo the work of the blocks they want to replace and then catch up with and surpass the rest of the network. And while they are doing this, the honest network does not stop. It keeps building forward, adding more and more weight to the chain. This is the essence of the so-called 51% attack. In theory, if one entity controls the majority of the network's total computational power, they could outpace everyone else and impose their version of history. But theory is not reality. In reality, acquiring that level of power is astronomically expensive. It requires massive infrastructure, ongoing energy costs, and coordination at a global scale. And even if someone succeeded, the reward is not guaranteed. Why? Because attacking Bitcoin undermines the very thing that gives it value. If users lose confidence in the immutability of the ledger, the price falls. If the price falls, mining rewards become less valuable. If rewards become less valuable, the attacker is burning energy for diminishing returns. Proof of work creates a strange but powerful equilibrium. The more valuable Bitcoin becomes, the more expensive it is to attack. And the more expensive it is to attack, the safer it becomes. Security and value reinforce each other. This feedback loop is not enforced by law. It is enforced by incentives. Another subtle aspect of proof of work is its objectivity. There is no debate about which chain is valid. Nodes simply follow the chain with the most accumulated work. Not the most blocks, not the oldest chain, the one that represents the greatest expenditure of energy. This removes politics from the equation. There is no committee arguing over legitimacy. No emergency meetings, no human discretion. The rules are simple, transparent, and the same for everyone. Anyone can verify the outcome for themselves. You don't need to ask permission. You don't need to trust a spokesperson. You run the software, and the truth reveals itself. This is what makes Bitcoin different from systems that rely on social consensus. Social consensus can fracture. It can be manipulated. It can be rewritten by those with influence. Proof of work anchors consensus in something far more stubborn: physics. Energy spent in the past cannot be undone. Time cannot be reversed. Work already performed remains a permanent part of the system's history. To change the past, you must pay for it again, and then some. This is why Bitcoin history becomes more secure over time. A transaction confirmed yesterday is safer than one confirmed an hour ago. A transaction confirmed years ago is effectively untouchable. Trust emerges not because participants are trustworthy, but because cheating is irrational. This design also explains why Bitcoin does not rush. 10-minute blocks are not a flaw. They are a deliberate pacing mechanism. They give the network time to propagate information, to resolve temporary disagreements, and to maintain global coherence. Slowness, in this context, is a form of stability. Proof of work does not aim to maximize throughput or minimize latency. It aims to maximize resistance to capture. It favors durability over convenience. And that choice reflects a deeper philosophy. Bitcoin is not optimized for today's comfort. It is optimized for survival in hostile environments. The result is a system where rules matter more than rulers, and where consensus is not negotiated but enforced by reality itself. Still, this does not mean proof of work is perfect. It has costs, it has critics, and alternative models have emerged, claiming to offer the same security without the same energy expenditure. So why does Bitcoin refuse to change? Why does it remain committed to proof of work when the rest of the crypto world experiments with new forms of consensus? To answer that, we need to look not just at how proof of work works, but at what Bitcoin is trying to protect. That is where the final piece of the puzzle comes into view. As Bitcoin matured, alternatives began to appear. New consensus mechanisms promised speed, efficiency, and lower energy consumption. Proof of stake, in particular, emerged as a popular contender. It offered a different philosophy. Instead of proving commitment through energy, participants prove it through ownership. On the surface, this seems elegant. Less electricity, faster confirmation times, a system that feels more modern. And yet, Bitcoin never followed that path. This refusal is often misunderstood as stubbornness or conservatism. In reality, it reflects a very precise understanding of what Bitcoin is meant to be. Bitcoin is not trying to be the fastest system. It is not trying to be the most flexible. It is not even trying to be the most efficient. Bitcoin is trying to be unchangeable. Proof of work plays a critical role in this goal. Because participation in proof of work is external to the system, it prevents circular power structures. You cannot gain influence simply by owning more Bitcoin. You must continuously expend resources that exist outside the network. This creates a separation between wealth and control. In systems where influence is derived from ownership, power naturally accumulates. The rich become more influential, and the influential become richer. Over time, governance tends to drift towards centralization, even if it begins with good intentions. Proof of work resists this drift. It forces participants to compete in the open, on equal terms, governed by physics rather than policy. Electricity costs the same regardless of ideology. Hash functions do not care who you are. The rules do not change based on social pressure. This is why Bitcoin's monetary policy has remained untouched. No emergency updates, no supply changes, no discretionary interventions. The cost of changing the system is simply too high. Critics often focus on energy consumption, framing it as waste. But this perspective assumes that the only valuable use of energy is immediate productivity. Bitcoin challenges that assumption. The energy used in proof of work is not spent to compute an answer. It is spent to defend a boundary. It is the energy cost of neutrality, the price paid to ensure that no one can rewrite the rules once they are set. Every major system of independence has carried a cost. Freedom of speech requires legal systems. Physical security requires standing armies. Monetary independence requires a foundation that cannot be coerced. Bitcoin chose energy as that foundation. And importantly, proof of work does not prescribe how energy is generated. Miners are economically incentivized to seek the cheapest sources available. This often leads them to stranded, excess, or renewable energy that would otherwise be wasted. Over time, the system naturally pushes toward efficiency, not by mandate, but by competition. More than that, proof of work creates a global market for energy that is location agnostic and time flexible. Mining can turn unused power into economic value anywhere on Earth. This characteristic may prove far more significant in the long run than it appears today. But beyond economics and infrastructure, proof of work protects something more abstract. It protects the idea that rules should be harder to change than opinions. In Bitcoin, consensus is not about majority votes or social sentiment. It is about continuity. The longest chain does not win because people like it. It wins because it represents the most work, the most sacrifice, the most commitment to the system as it exists. This makes Bitcoin deeply conservative in the best sense of the word. It conserves its history. It preserves its past. It treats changes with suspicion and continuity with respect. That is why Bitcoin feels slow, why it resists trends, why it does not rush to adopt new ideas simply because they are fashionable. And that slowness is not a weakness. It is a shield. Proof of work ensures that Bitcoin remains a system where trust is minimized, power is externalized, and truth is verifiable by anyone willing to check. In a world increasingly built on narratives, promises, and centralized platforms, Bitcoin offers something unusual, a system where reality asserts itself through mathematics and energy. So when we ask what consensus algorithm Bitcoin uses, the technical answer is simple. It uses proof of work. But the real answer is far more profound. Bitcoin uses effort instead of authority, physics instead of politics, and time instead of trust. And as long as those forces remain difficult to fake, Bitcoin's consensus will continue to hold.